Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the channel. Thank you so much for tuning in. We're going to talk about one of my favorite things, which is stories. The Amazon's best book of 2022. It's called Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow. If you haven't heard about this book, I highly recommend it. It's amazing. If you're into games especially, I'm super into games. I grew up playing video games. I don't play them as much anymore. So if you really want to read the book, this might not be the video for you. You can skip around. I'm not going to spoil it too bad, but I'm going to talk about the book a little, of course. But the whole point is, reading this book, it really, I think, was a great example of human relationships. And so I wanted to tease out some of these big takeaways that I found from reading this book. I recently finished it and it did a number on me and it made me think about things a little differently. So let's jump into my 5 top takeaways from Tomorrow and Tomorrow, Tomorrow. The first big takeaway, and you've heard me talk about this before, anytime I talk about death, when I do any videos, is to don't let things go unsaid. There's a point in the book when one of the characters wants to say I love you to another character and they don't. They have this little cute interaction and the little character's like, they have this internal monologue and like, oh man, I should say I love you, but they don't. And then the other character, the kind of chapter switches and you're into the mind of the other character who doesn't get it said to them. And they come up with this crazy narrative in their head. And it's one of those narratives we're all guilty of. I know you are too. I definitely am. But it's this kind of narrative that we spin around actions that someone else has done that we tell ourselves that they're doing it for a certain reason. So without diving into too many of the details, thinking about personal examples for your own life, there's the human communication that happens to us on this level, on this plane of I say something, you take it at face value. And then there's all the other human communication that happens. So if we're driving the car together, I'm riding a shotgun and you're driving and I turn the music down, you might think, oh, he doesn't like this music. Or you might think, he wants to talk. Or you might think he's punishing me for something. There's like a zillion, we read into actions. And so to me, it ends up spiraling into this crazy stress. It causes them both a lot of stress and tension in their relationship later on because this one action that could have been avoided. And the craziest part is the character thinks, I want to say I love you. They think I should say I love you, but they're like, I'll wait until tomorrow. By the time it comes around to even say it, things have already kind of started to go off the rails. And so it really hammered the point home for me that don't wait to give people their flowers and don't forget to tell people you love them because you really never know. We often assume that we think we know how other people believe we feel about them. A little bit of a crazy thing, but it really pays to be explicit. Tell people how you really feel, especially if it's for something positive. Takeaway number 2 that I thought was really powerful for this was that material wealth doesn't bring happiness. This is it's a book. It's really interesting the way it's told. The author, she writes it almost over 3 decades. So it's these two, it kind of follows these, pretty much this, I want to say triumvirate, but I think that's too much of a fancy word. It follows these kind of 3 kids, the story of 3 kids and the way that their lives interact together, programming video games. But it's so much more than that. Trust me, you got to read it. But anyways, when they're first starting out, things are really difficult. And then later on, in another decade, the next decade, they start to have some success. And it's in that success that things start to go off the rails, not in a great way. Like as they continue to blow up and continue to gain more material success, it continues to stress their relationship. And this to me is a really interesting thing about right now with this YouTube channel, talking to you, where I'm building this. I don't have a ton of subscribers. I'm not making a ton of money from it. And I want the success so badly. And trying to understand on my Ryan Holiday shit, the obstacle is the way, right? And that really brings me to my next point, which I think is so beautiful, ties in here. Point number 3, it's the points of struggle that we often miss the most once we've made it. It's often these points of struggle that are the most beautiful, that are kind of the most exciting, they're the most heartbreaking, because after a while, it gets difficult once you've made it for another plethora of reasons. But there's this kind of push and pull between self-doubt and self-belief and wanting to make it when you're in this startup phase. I know this, I'm talking to myself right now because I'm in that kind of startup phase with this, that in the book, it's fascinating to kind of see that how after that first decade, the next 2 decades, they continue to look back on it when it was the toughest, when they were broke, when the 3 of them were living in like crashing the same bedroom, had no resources. That's a beautiful part of the story. So no matter where you are in your process, to me, I think a lot about this sort of how much we like origin stories. Again, bring it back to this idea of narrative and story. Whether it's Jeff Bezos starting out in the garage or Steve Jobs starting out in the garage, there's the origin story that we like, and that's for a reason. And so for me right now, kind of in my origin story piece of this, starting this new part of my career, thinking about how can I embrace this moment right now. Same within the book. The best part is sometimes the most difficult part, but it's the part that we're going to look back on later at times because there's a real beauty, I think, in that kind of startup, beginning piece before you have any success, when it's a real kind of trudge up the mountain. But I think there's something really beautiful about that. Point number 4 that I thought was really powerful, and I think about this a lot in my own life too, is how often our limitations can be motivation for creativity. What do I mean by that? Right now, this YouTube channel, I'm also starting to write online, I'm doing these other things, and it's born out of a place of being uncomfortable. I had a business that I've been running for the last 5 years, pretty much, 3-4 years. And now that I'm in this new place, I don't really know what I'm doing. I'm experimenting a lot and it's uncomfortable. But this comfort pushes me to do things. It makes me grow. It makes me think about things differently, because it's when we're uncomfortable that we often find that we're growing, right? When you win, that's awesome, but it can be difficult to learn those lessons. Compared to, I love this phrase, they always say, mistakes are the most information-rich data stream there is. And I completely believe in that. And so right now, I'm just trying stuff, I'm experimenting. And in terms of the book, it's when they're in that starting out phase again, that they have all these limitations. They have no money, they don't have much time. It's just the 3 of them that don't have any extra manpower. But the game that they create ends up being really powerful because they talk about it, how they work within these limitations of the graphics, of the engine that they're running it on. They're scrappy, right? And it's working in those limitations that end up making the game really beautiful. And so for myself, thinking about that right now, thinking about it's just me and this camera, my editor, shout out Jester, just the 2 of us thinking about how can we really build this thing and working within those limitations. We don't have a big team, don't have a lot of money, don't have a lot of time or resources, but we have hustle, we can get scrappy, and how can we kind of use those limitations, those handcuffs to our advantage. The channel, once it's much bigger, we might not be able to move as fast or iterate. So thinking about that for my own life was a big lesson, how those limitations can often breed a real sense of experimentation. Point number 5 that I thought was interesting and a big takeaway on this, I think about this a lot, but how it applies to intimate relationships, is how fighting can actually be a good thing. Hear me out. What do I mean by this? Now, if you're fighting, you're screaming and you're yelling and throwing things, not a good sign. That's not the type of fighting I'm talking about. But in this, there are kind of 2 main characters, and it's a love story, friendship of sorts, but they end up fighting a lot. And there comes a point in the story where there's kind of a mentor character who he's already made it with games. He's kind of has a little bit of fame on the kind of local video game circuit, and he's helping them out. And one of the main characters goes to him because they're friends and says, hey, we were fighting a lot. Like, I think I'm going to quit. And the mentor character says, he's like, no. He's like, that's a sign that you care. He's like, if you weren't fighting, then I'd be scared. But it's because you're fighting at this level that I actually think you might have something, because you both care so much about it. And I think there's a real fine line here between it being kind of negative fighting and being personal. But in my own life, when I think about this, how does this carry over to my own life and my personal relationships, especially my intimate relationships with a partner, thinking about, and also friendships, I guess too, is if it's something that it's worth keeping and it's worth fighting for, then it's worth having those difficult conversations. I also think it's worth learning how to do this in a way that's non-destructive, at least as non-destructive as possible. It's when you're fighting for something, it means you believe in it. It makes me think about this more with intimate partners, where at my best relationships are not when we haven't fought, because either they don't care or one of us is stuffing our emotions, right? It's not that we just never fight, because that's just not human, but it's about in my relationships when I've had a partner that really knew how to fight with me well, where our fighting style was about the thing. We were able to articulate our ideas. We were able to give it time, come back to it and say, you know what, actually, you're right. We weren't just fighting because it was art. Of course, I'm going to get heat in the moment. I understand that happens. But what I'm talking about is it's learning how to fight well, whether it's with a co-founder or an intimate partner or a friend. And I've thought about this a lot, even with my friendships. If I have a friendship and I'm feeling like I'm not getting the treatment that I want out of it, or the friendship is maybe I'm not getting the time or whatever it is, rather than just stuffing it down or letting it go, bringing it up in a way that says, hey, I really want, this friendship means a lot to me. You know, I really love it if we could connect more often. I honestly feel like I'm giving 80% here. I'm only getting 20. Is there a way that we can make this a little more even? I just want to talk about it and really bring these ideas and perspectives and emotions to the table without them necessarily needing to be personal or harmful or destructive. And so there are points in the book when it does become very personal and destructive, and when you start to get into these spirals that I see so often in intimate relationships, I'm guilty of this too, that I just thought was a really fascinating point for myself to figure out. It's not about finding somebody you don't fight with. It's about how do you find somebody that you enjoy fighting with or that you fight well with. And I think that's a really big takeaway. All right, y'all, thank you so much for tuning in. That's tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow on Kia Scale. I'd probably give it a 4.5 out of 5. There were some points when I did realize I was kind of getting a little bit, skipping ahead a little bit, but it's really well written. The characters, I felt like I was there. It made me super nostalgic because I just remember video games that are about Oregon Trail and all these different things. There's a reason it's Amazon's best book of 2022. If you're looking for great fiction, I honestly couldn't recommend it more. If you're into gaming, this is your book. I'm telling you. Thanks so much for tuning in, and I'll check you on the next one. Peace.